Hello, everybody. Welcome to the YouTube Mall Builders Tuesday night. Tonight we've got a new show starting up with Ralph Rossetti on weathering. Name of the show is Workbench to Mainline. It's going to be a really interesting show tonight, and hope everybody, well, don't hope, I know everybody's going to enjoy this show because we talk to Ralph almost every night, so he certainly knows his stuff about it, and his pictures prove it too. All right, let's transition over here to, well, first off, let me just tell you, go to YouTubeMallBuilders.com. There you can check on the YouTube events, the Tuesday night and the Wednesday nights. Those are at 8 o'clock Central, 9 o'clock Eastern Time. Thursday and the once a month Saturday show is at 9 o'clock Central, 10 o'clock Eastern Time. And also be sure and click on the e-mag and put in your email address there so that you'll be notified when the e-mag comes out. We got another issue coming out in about the middle of November, somewhere right around that time frame. And this one's because of the month of November being in, JD's made this one the N scale issue. So you want to be sure and check that one out. And now I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Ralph here. Uh-oh. What did I do wrong? There you go. Now you're on screen.
All right.
All right, Ralph. There you go. You think this is my first time doing this.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay. This on camera stuff is kind of weird to me, but we'll manage. My whole goal is to share what I've learned in this hobby, and I've turned to weathering. It's a totally different aspect. Some people like it, some people don't, and I'm okay with the ones that don't. The only problem I have is that they get rid of the toy-like shine if they don't want to weather. Just a light coat, a dull coat, and that's as good a weathering as you're going to get if you don't want to do any more. And that's fine. So, with that said, I have a presentation that I would like to set up for you. And it's taking the beginner and it's a starting point. It's not just for the beginner, it's for everybody. It's how to add grime and make it look convincing. I've gotten to the stage at the moment where I can be traveling with my wife in the car, and if we have to stop for a railroad crossing, or we're going underneath an underpass and there's trains on it, she points out the weathered cars. I've got her trained now too. So that's actually working out pretty good to me. So with that said, here's the presentation. Now, come on, start up. And I will explain this. And if you have any questions for this or during this presentation, please speak up. Why doesn't it want to start? Oh, maybe it's in behind. Yep, there we go. Can you see that? Okay. So, of all those pictures, only one of them is real, and that's the wheel set. The rest are all weathered state of some sort. So this is the car I chose to do this thing. It's a Norfolk Western Hopper. It's fairly simple. It has the plastic walkways on it. The new ones have the photo etched, and the photo etched are almost impossible to take off. If you can take any of the hardware on the car off before you start, that's the best thing to do. So I start by mixing up some water mixable oils. I have the Winsor Newton. I use gouaches as well, also Winsor Newton. Gouaches are watercolor paints. And they come in a tube like a toothpaste tube or like oil paints do, but a smaller tube. And I mix the two together using window washer fluid from your car and microsol. And they do mix together. And once I have that done, I apply it all over the car. And you don't have to be careful with this. It doesn't matter where it goes because you're going to be taking it off. So you spread it on liberally all over the place. And then you come back with a makeup sponge. And what I do with the makeup sponge, I don't use the makeup sponge as it is. I use, I tear off little pieces of the bottom so it's uneven and dampened with window washing fluid. And then just so that you've got some, like you can soak up liquids better with a wet or damp article than you can with a dry one. Dry ones, I don't know what it is about them. They seem to want to resist the liquids at first. So if you dampen your sponge and you go back and you go over what you painted on, you get this grimy fade. And this is the whole idea, to put grime on the car. So after you've done it, that's sort of what it looks like. Now, at that point, or even actually before you start, it depends on how you want to do this. I always work from a prototype photograph. And if I can't get the exact car that I'm looking for, like the road name, I will find one that is the same car, weathered the way I want it. And I will work from that as a guide. So you can, if in some cases you see like a CN car or something that has big block letters where the paint is actually fading off, you can scratch that off with a fiberglass brush, and I'll show you that later. But you can scratch it down so that it looks like it has been weathered off, and then you put your grime on. So there's what the bottom of the sponge looks like. So now, to get the letters to fade, because those letters in that last picture, they were still kind of dark. There's no, okay?
Real quick, we got one question here from MHO Junction, our good buddy Lloyd. He said, Ralph, do you change color if the car is, let's say, red, green, or brown, etc.?
For a car like I started off here, it's gray. I'll use the dark browns. For a car that's red or green or black, I'll start with a little bit of the dark brown mixed with a little bit more white. The thing is, you want it to fade, and this is how you achieve it. You can either use white gouache or you can use the white oil paint that you mix in. It works, to me, it works better with the gouache when you add the white. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah. Okay.
So here I'm adding some white to the liquid I had mixed before, and I'm going to slap that on the letters because I want to fade down the letters. So you put it on the same way with the brush, or you can put it on with a sponge, because that way you get a more of an uneven finish. Like it's modeled. It's not brush strokes. and it tones down the letters. Then you come back with your brush and you add it to your sills, to your railings, to the stairs, to your catwalk on top, even the underside. But I only do one side of the car at a time. So if I'm working on this side, I'm working on this side completely. Then maybe I'll work on the top, or work on the other side and then the top, work on the two ends at the same time, like separately. But don't do the whole car, because if this stuff dries, you're going to have trouble trying to take it off with the sponge. So it's put it on, take it off. Don't wait for it to dry. And when you get up underneath the walkways, it's not always easy to get a sponge in there. So you put it on with the brush, you take it off with the brush. But now you use the brush like a dabbing motion to try and give you that mottled finish again. When you get to the ends, you're going to get, if you look at in real life on the prototype, you look at the ends and you'll see spatter that comes up from the car ahead, from the wheels. There's two definite lines of grime or dirt, and depending on how dark the soil is in your area, that's where you're getting this grime from. So you try and match your road. If your road has a lot of reds in the soil, then your cars are going to look a little bit on the reddish side, because it's dust that's being kicked up by the wheels. So in order to get that spatter, you put some of that stuff on your brush and you just flick the brush, and it gives you that line of droplets that go on the back. You can see it better on the right-hand car, the spatter. So then you go to the bottom, you do all the same thing to the bottom. You paint it on, you dab it off with a sponge and go at the corners and the crevices with a brush. And once you start this process, you're going to start, like I used a 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch brush here. That's going to be your weathering brush from now on, because once you start doing this, there's no recovering, because if you start dabbing it, the hairs on it are going to start to curl, and that's okay. It makes it a better dabbing brush than a painting brush. So now you want to put the grime on the walkway and so on. Again, you do it with the sponge, the roof hatches. And here's where you have to know your car. And if you don't, you have to sort of guess at it. When they put these cars together, initially they had metal hatches. So the metal hatch is definitely going to rust or deteriorate the same way a metal would. So at some point, some of them went to aluminum, and then some went to fiberglass. If they went to fiberglass, all you're going to see on them is road grime. You're not going to see any rust, except for where the hardware is. So you're going to have to address that separately. You can come back later with a fine brush and add your rust on the brackets. You can add a little bit of grime before you start and then take it off, and it'll tuck itself around that little star that you see there, like so. So you let them dry a little bit, and then you come back and you get that mottled finish. I had 10-15 minutes to dry, but no more than that. So here you come with the brush again, because there's certain areas that you can't get at. You have to dab underneath the walkway, so you might as well do the whole top like that. Now you can use alcohol at this point, a little bit of alcohol, or the window washing liquid, which has a bit of alcohol in it. So now it's time to add patterns of rust. And again, it's water mixable oils that I use. And there's that one there is burnt sienna and raw sienna. And you blend the two together to get the color, and you can vary the color. You don't have to have it blended together. You can have them separate. But at some point, they are going to be blended in together. So again, now we got another question. Okay, go ahead.
All right, we got one more cue. Question here from AJ. In theory, cars roam the whole country. So is the wheel splash always that local? Or is there a rainbow of shades of mud across the given random section of the cars?
Good question. If you know the car's local, then you can do it local color. Otherwise, it really doesn't matter, because grime on top of grime, you may have one color one day and a different color the next day because it ran on new ballast or something. You get different colors. But if it's going to stay locally, then yeah, I would stick to one color. But I wouldn't put the rainbow shade. I would just go ahead and use a darker grime, sort of like what we're doing now with this brush. You do the same thing on the underside. So when you dab it on, it's not that you're trying to work it evenly all over the place. You're trying to make it uneven. And of course, you can't get under the walkway again, so now you have to push it in and work at it and get the color around where the vertical standoffs are, and spread it out from there. But the heaviest concentration is at the brackets. So that's after you've done the oil treatment. So now you let that dry. And what I normally do, because I like to work quickly, oil paint is going to take at least 24 hours to dry. But you've got it on thin enough that you can put a coat of dull coat on it. And what I do is I buy the dull coat in the jar. It's a 1 3/4 ounce jar from Testers, and I mix it with lacquer thinner 50-50, and I shoot it through an airbrush. That way I can overcoat the whole thing with a coat of dull coat, and I can move on to the next stage. And I don't have to worry about the oil being 100% dry. It's thin enough that I can coat it now. But I would leave it for a few hours before, so you just don't have to leave it overnight. So then we work on the hatches again and around the hatches, doing the same thing we did around the brackets and the top of the crest of the side. The heaviest concentrations are usually on the top, or they're washed off so they show up on the bottom. Every car is different. Some of them start to rust through from the top because that's where it gets the most moisture. And you have to understand rust, I guess. When it starts, it's because of water being present, then it dries. Water being present, then it dries. And a few of those cycles starts to crack the paint. When the paint cracks, then the rust starts to seep through. And this is what you get. So now this is all done so far without any powders of any kind. This is just the oil paints and the gouaches. You can do this whole thing with gouaches if you really want to. but it's going to take a lot longer because the gouaches are watercolors and you have to be really careful how they go on. So now it's time for rust pits and streaks. What I do is I take the oil paint, and in this case it's burnt umber or raw umber, burnt sienna. Mix them together with a little bit of well, they'll mix together on their own. You don't have to use any thinners or anything. And you put on these little dots of what look like rust, festering rust. And then I come back with the brush soaked with mineral spirits, or even the microsol, and you drag it down over the dot. You wet the area going across the top. You'll see then it streaks down. Then you come with your other brush. You blend it a little bit on the side so that you get this streak from that dot of oil paint. Now I found that it works. If I wanted to do this, there's two real easy ways. One is with gouache and microsol. The other is with oil paints and mineral spirits. Put the dot, you have a soaked brush with mineral spirits, and you just drag it down. And if you're, I found I used to be able to draw straight lines, absolutely no problem, without a ruler. But as you get older, you lose that ability. So in order to assist my brush for going straight, I'll take the handle of another brush and just hold it sideways so that I use it as a guide for my brush to run along, and it gives me a straight line. Because what ends up happening is my brush, if I don't use that, it wants to tail off to one side or the other as I get towards the bottom. So this way you're running along the side of it. And I'll show you what I mean a little bit later on screen. So then we go at the ends again. This is where you're adding a bit more grime, your spatter from the car head, as well as regular road grime. So there's a combination of things. You have the mottled coloring, and then you have the spatter. And so it's going to be on the verticals, on the ladder rungs, on your brake equipment, and the lines on the end of the drums of the cylinder. Couplers. My personal choice is to not weather couplers because I don't want them to fail when I need them to work. So it's your option. You can do just a little bit on the outside and leave the inside faces and the hinge points so that they're clean. And then dust them with a little bit of graphite afterwards to make them operate smoothly. But that's basically the same thing. It's done with a brush, done with a sponge combination, and that's what it ends up looking like. Trucks. This is a really interesting area to work in. I started out using Vallejo paints because they had the rust colors I was looking for. But I found putting any kind of paint, or almost any kind of paint, on the plastic material that trucks are made out of, all you have to do is handle it for a very short time and that stuff just flakes right off. So what I found is I use Rust-Oleum camouflage paint. Chocolate brown is my base color. And it gives you that sort of reddish brown look. and then I come back at it with some gouaches afterwards. A little bit of lighter sienna, raw sienna, burnt sienna, in around the crevices. The wheels are done so that you do just the face of the wheel and the back of the wheel and possibly even the axle. But you have to keep the paint off the tire, the part that makes contact with the rail. So in this case, I used gouaches, and it works pretty good. I've had no problem with it so far. So you can see the top frame after it's been treated with first the Rust-Oleum, then a little bit of gouache using the sponge to add it instead of a brush, and then just highlighting the crevices with a nice fine brush with the burnt sienna so that it looks like a fresh rust. That's what it looks like when it's done. Now there's a little trick to this. I take a graphite pencil. You probably all used when you were in grade school, the yellow pencil with the lead in it. Run it along the edges of the truck after you've done, and you put a dull coat on it, and then come back with the pencil and do those edges, and then just rub it with your finger, and you get that sort of a steel look to it, along with all the rust. The bearings, you have your choice of things. You can use a grimy black that's looks like even a gloss mixed with a little bit of a touch of silver to give it a sort of a metallic look. Or you do it in a grimy black and you touch it with future floor finish. The future floor finish will give it a gloss look of being wet oil or grease or whatever. A little bit of dusting of your burnt sienna around the springs as well, because they're constantly moving. So there's what the car ends up looking like. And you can, okay. We have a question.
Yeah, we got several questions here. Let me back it up. Sparky and Ralph are having a little bit of a conversation here, so hopefully they'll be asking weathering questions here pretty quick. Jim Watson. Jim, we're on a little bit of a tight time schedule tonight, but I do promise I will get Ralph to show you his fascia and go into some detail on it, maybe on the next show. But tonight we're not going to be able to get into that. I apologize, but we're just on too tight a schedule. Let's see. Michael, how you doing tonight? He said for the wheels itself, do you use paint or rust powder? You've already explained that one. Dave asked, could you use acrylic instead of the oil paint? When
yes.
Go ahead.
Yes. You can use any kind of paint you want on the wheels, but before you paint them, give them a rinse with rubbing alcohol so that the paint sticks, because they're a very shiny, smooth finish, and you want the paint to stick to them. If there's any bit of grease on there, the paint will chip off, no matter what you use.
Let's see. All right, so you're just using oil paints. Michael is wanting to know how you get the crust look.
How do you get the which?
Crusty look.
I haven't done any crusty look on this yet, although it's all done with the sponge. Like I pointed out, you have the oil dots that were never really dragged down. That would give you little lumps, if that's what he's talking about.
Yeah, that's probably it. Yeah, Sparky 107 said he liked how the trucks look like worn, aged metal. not shiny but smooth look to it. And let's see. Well, just real quick for those interested, Andrew in Australia said he's still ticking. He just showed up in the chat. How you doing? And Ralph Greenwood said he's really liking the look you got on the metal. Yeah, that graphite pencil, that is one neat trick.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, Andrew, can you explain the term gouache?
Okay. Gouache is oil paints, or not oil paints, pardon me, watercolor paints in a tube like toothpaste. So it's a paste that you can mix with water. You can mix, I use microsol to mix with it as well. But it's a watercolor paint. And in order to use a watercolor paint here, you have to make sure that the surface is clean. You can't put a gouache on top of an oil surface because it just won't stick properly. So between layers, a light dusting of dull coat, and then you can use gouache by itself, not a problem. Anybody else?
Michael was just saying, previous to his comment, no, I mean on the wheels itself to represent new rust. I guess how do you do that? But that's just, you're just painting that effect on is what you're doing.
Yep. And it depends on the color paint you use. Now, I've recently started using acrylic paints. After I clean them really good with alcohol, I'll use the acrylic paints, and I may mix two or three different colors together to get the rusty look that I'm looking for. Because on the wheel face, it's not really bright rust. It's rust with a whole bunch of dirt and grime on top of it. And then if you want to touch off where the hub is with a little bit of a like I did on the trucks with a burnt sienna, you can do that, but it's not necessary because the truck actually covers the hub of the wheel.
Okay.
And depending on your scale, of course, if you're down doing N scale, I wouldn't even bother. I would just paint them whatever color and do as much detail as you can, but you have to remember now you're half the size again. And the level of weathering that you do on an HO car, on an N scale car, will wash, it just won't look right at all. So you have to go a little bit lighter on the N scale. Weathering doesn't scale very well. As you get bigger, you have to add more.
All right, Phil Wyman said, why use microsol or windshield washer rather than just water?
Okay. I was a member of a group called Model Trains Weathered, and they had a forum where they shared ideas. It was a private group, and that's all they did was weathering and R&D, the air quotes R&D, research and development. They played around with all kinds of different things, and they were the ones that came up with the microsol by accident, that it tends to make the two different paints blend together. Now, since that group has now defunct, it's no longer, the members of that group, or some of them anyway, formed a group called Rust Bucket, which I'm also a member of. They still are researching and developing different ways of doing weathering. I've also gone on to develop some of my own ways too, but this, what I showed you here tonight, is what was developed by those guys and myself together. That's what we came up with.
Alrighty, well, we'll let you get back to the presentation.
It's almost done. That's what the car looks like when you're done. And the whole idea is to get the downward flow of your color once you start putting the streaks on, so that it looks like it's been washed down by the weather. What happened here? Okay. Yeah, it went back to 1. I think that's the end of that one. Okay, so, yep.
Yes. Alrighty, let's see here. Who was it? There was one in here real quick. Oh, Ralph Greenwood. Do you use isopropyl alcohol on the rolling stock before weathering?
Yes, I do. I wash them down. Not so much alcohol, but I do wash them down. You can use the window washing liquid to wash it. The idea is to get if there's any mold release that's still on the plastic, you want to get it off so that your paint sticks properly and doesn't start to bead. Okay. And for those who haven't seen it, so if anybody ends up going to lobster places and so on for dinner, and the lobster claws have the elastic on them to keep them closed, snafu the elastic, because it makes a great gripper for taking the caps off these bottles or these tubes.
A little out of frame.
Oh, here we go. It's almost, this stuff, it drying out a bit. Okay, so the dark one is gouache, and the light one is the oil paint. And this is the microsol. I put a little eyedropper in it so that I can get it out easy.
About 1 drop.
It was 2. Now, when I do this, I usually do a larger batch, and I do it really watery. I'm just showing you that how it does mix together. There are some spots of the oil paint that tend to want to stay in a ball, but if you keep working at it, they will blend together. So I'm ready to put that on a car. I would have put a darker color in as well, like burnt sienna. And these are actually called water mixable oils.
Artesian.
So that's one area. So let's do this. All right, where'd my sponge go? No place to put it down. Okay. And if you don't believe me, windshield washer liquid, there it is, windshield washer liquid. And it works beautifully. So I put it in a small bottle with a spray top. I can spray it right into the sponge, get it wet, but I don't want it soaking wet. So the idea is to squeeze it out, and you'll find these makeup sponges, which you can buy at the dollar store, by the way, and they come in a package of about, you can get these wedges, or you can get round ones like this in separate packages. The wedges come in, I think there's 24 in a package. So if I squeeze that really hard, there's no more water left in it. It's not going to come out. But the idea here is to pick off the corners, the edges, so that they don't leave a straight line. There. So the bottom of the sponge is uneven. I come back. Where are we? Just a little touch, and just dab it. You're doing this on the side of a car. You can clean off your brush, come back, and take off some more until you get it to the degree of grime you want. Let me clean off my brush or the sponge. And we come back at it again.
Now, when you clean that sponge off, you just wipe it on a paper towel or something?
Yep, it's exactly what I did. I wet it with the window washing fluid, and then I just dabbed it into the sponge, squeezed it into the tissue. I like to use the, what do they call them? Shop cloths, the blue ones. You get them at Costco. They come on a roll just like paper towels do. They last a little longer. They go a little further. But that's basically how that works. So then, don't need the sponge in there. Okay. I have a couple of things that I can do. Well, let's do this. I have an acrylic matte finish. This is made by Vallejo. Is it going to focus or not? Anyway, it doesn't matter. The number on this, it's called Vallejo Premium Airbrush Color 62 dash, or not dash, dot 062, and it's matte finish, and it comes in a dispenser so that you can spray it out or put it out drop wise. So I'm gonna spray that. So I want a couple of drops in here. There's 4 drops. Turn on the compressor, and I'm going to coat it. And that's pretty well it. So now I can get this to dry. I have 2 ways of doing it. If I'm mobile, it's kind of hard for me to take a hairdryer with me. So I managed to find this at the dollar store. It's one of those electric fans, battery operated. So I use that to dry what I just airbrushed. You can use the air from the airbrush if you want, because I have it like it's a dual action brush.
All right, while that's drying, we got a couple of comments. Andy Crawford, so you're making it more of remove till effect as opposed to add till effect effort. And hi, Curtis,
That's right.
how you doing? Go ahead.
So that, yes, that's for your basic grind, the first coat you put on.
Yeah, we got Dustin in here. He has a question about, would that sponge dabbing technique work just as well for fading as it dries for the rust and grime?
I'm not exactly sure what he means. Fading.
Probably letting it dry and then come back with a sponge as it's drying off to kind of fade it out. Wipe it down.
I've never done it that way. I really don't know.
Yeah.
The one thing I have to tell you is, like, this is the way I do it, and this is the information I'm trying to give you. I'm not saying my way is the best way, but this is what I found works, and so do a few other guys. They feel the same.
Yeah, works well. Ralph here says, have you used this method for weathering a darker colored piece of rolling stock?
Yes. And when you do it, you have to use the lighter colors to fade it. And once you do that, you'll see the, say it's a black. The black is going to start to turn gray if you add white to your colors. So you're going to add a little bit of brown, a little bit of white, and maybe even a touch of black, so you've got that gray color. And if you use the modeled effect, if you do this with the sponge to start with, then it should work. I have used it on black, on red boxcar color, the red oxide. I've used it on dark green of the BC rail cars. I also use other methods for fading that are a little bit quicker and less messy. I can show you that too.
All right, let's see. I think I got clarification here. We also only have 10 minutes, Ralph.
Okay.
This is Destin again. Sorry, I had typo. If I were to use light colors to attempt a fading of the bright colored car instead of just the rust and grime, would the dabbing technique work just as well?
Yes. Yes. That's why I was saying adding the white to your colors makes them a little bit brighter, and fades your colors. Now, the neat trick of these colors, the burnt sienna, the burnt umber have a red as part of their makeup. And on the darker colors, like the greens especially, it works beautifully. Because if you look at the colors on a color wheel, green is opposite of red and vice versa. So if you're doing a red car, you add a little bit of green to it. Or if you're doing a green car, you add a little bit of red to it. The red's already in this, and you can continue on going over every car you want. And if it's a dark car, just add a little bit of white to brighten it up.
Yeah, Stu just made a bit of a funny comment here. He said, I need to find out what the dirt is on my computer screen. It looks like a good weathering too. LOL. I'll leave it up to Stu and AJ.
Well, there's another technique, and Andy made mention of it. Mr. Crawford. He says Ralph oversprays with a white spray, and that's true, I do. And I'm going to show you that right now. Where's my Kleenex? Okay. So I have some Tamiya paint mixed in with isopropyl alcohol at a rate of 10% paint, 90% alcohol. And when you spray, and this I'm going to do it from the top down on about a 60-degree angle. Well, I guess I should turn on the compressor. It works better.
Yeah.
Okay. The first few coats, it looks like nothing's going on. I'm going to do the one side so you can see the difference. Now this car, I want it to go really faded. Now, like I said, it's only 10% paint. And I don't know whether you can see the difference. So you can see at about halfway down is where the color stops or the fade stops, and the underside hasn't been touched yet. And that's the way it weathers naturally too. If you come down at it at about a 60-degree angle. And then after you've got about 3 or 4 coats, you stop and let it dry. And it'll actually change color on you. You'll see it start to change. Well, you may not on the camera. It's funny, that car looks almost turquoise on the screen, and yet with me it's a real royal blue.
I'm getting a blue here.
That's the undone side. And what I did, like I mentioned earlier, if you wanted to make the lettering look like it's faded a little bit, I can show you what that looks like before I scratched it. I have another car.
All right, while you're doing that, Stu here said, yep, the sun cooks paint that way, especially on red paints, even worse.
It does it to all paints.
Yeah.
And the reason why you see it more nowadays is because they're using clear coat over it. And the clear coat is what starts to turn white under the hot beating sun. Paint does fade. I mean, you can have a locomotive or a box car or whatever kind of car come out of the shop today, and by the end of the week, it's not the same color it came out of the shop as. So there's the one I scratched, and there's the original.
Yeah.
So the scratching is done with, I have this fiberglass pen, and the bristles on it are real glass, fiberglass. And you have to be careful. If you're doing this, make sure you have gloves on, because if this stuff gets in between your fingers, it'll be itchy for days. It's just like putting fiberglass insulation in. So you scratch it at the top, take some of the paint off, and then come back and do your fade. And it sort of blends even more. So I'm going to add some more fade because I want this to go really, really.
All right, while you're doing that, AJ's got a question.
Okay.
If you were starting from scratch with an undecorated piece of equipment, would you work the weathering, fading into the colors, or would you paint the model as new and then weather it?
I would paint it as new and then weather it. I have more control over it. So the guys that do the military stuff, they have a what I call a blank canvas. They start pretty well from scratch, like you're talking about. No decals, nothing, and they paint, and they get to a certain stage before they do their heavy weathering, and then they add their decals. When they add their decals, they use future floor finish, because most of the paints that they have are flat paints, and in order for your decals to stick properly, it should be on a gloss surface. Future floor finish is a natural acrylic, and it's glossy. You put your decal on, then you put another layer of future floor finish on, and it tends to hide the edges of the decal. Then they go back and they add whatever dull finishes they want to it and continue on with the weathering. But once you put a decal on, you cannot use this brush on the decal because it'll rip it to shreds, even if it's stuck on. So that's basically what I've got so far. I'm going to continue on. I have two Canadian Pacific cars in red that I'm weathering, and I used this method with the fading first. That I'm going to show you another technique that I use. The two cars that I have are from Lloyd, MHO. He's donated the two cars so that I could weather them. And then we'll go from there. So if there's any other questions, now's the time, because I'm going to be shutting down in a bit.
No, we're doing pretty good right now, Ralph. They were asking where to get the pen, but they were Stu Total Micro Mart. And Phil Wyman said $5 on eBay.
for the pen.
Yes.
Yeah, and then Stu says use a typing eraser pen. That's like a Bright Boy, if I'm correct, if what he's using. And that's going to take a lot more off than you want. At least with this fiberglass pen, I can attack the graphic, the pad decal, or however it's done. It's printed silk screened. I can attack that without attacking the undercoat that's below it. Now, I got this from Micromark. You can get it at Automotive Supply Company because they were originally designed to burnish the points of a distributor. Now, a lot of cars don't have distributors anymore unless you're into restoring cars. They also have this one here is a stainless steel brush. They have one in brass as well. I use the stainless steel one when I want to shred some wood, when I'm doing a wood kit on the bottom of the boards, on the siding of a building. So that's it for tonight, guys. If you have any other questions, save them for next week. Or not next week, but I think it's November 28th.
Yep, next month. We'll end it with Robert Holloman. He said, thanks for showing us how you do such an amazing job. I'm really looking forward to the next installment.
Great. So there's also a piece of news, and I noticed a lot of people, and I'm not knocking it, I don't use chalks or pastels because chalks and pastels were designed for wood, paper, canvas. They're not meant to be used on plastic. Some people have good results with it. That's fine. If that's the case, continue on using it to your heart's content. But I challenge you to use paint pigment powder and then come back and tell me which one you like better. There's going to be an article in the eMag this upcoming issue explaining the differences between pigment powders and chalks or pastels.
Alrighty. Well, I appreciate it, Ralph. This was definitely a good show, and everybody's saying thanks. They've really enjoyed it. So we'll switch on over here and bring it to an end. Alright, I want to say go to youtubemallbuilders.com. There you can check on all the schedules for the Tuesday, Wednesday shows. Those shows come on at 8 o'clock Central, 9 o'clock Eastern Time. The Thursday show and the Saturday once a month live show, those air at 9 o'clock Central, 10 o'clock Eastern Time. Big Bill just had his show last Saturday with Troy and Steve Montgomery. That turned out to be a really good show. An update on Troy's layout and Steve's buildings he's done for him. Also be sure to click on the eMag and sign up for an email notification when it comes out, which will be about, somewhere around the middle of the month in November. That's going to be N scale, all about the N scales, and Ralph has got an article in there about weathering, so I know everybody's going to enjoy that one. And let's see here, next month we've only thing we got left for this month is my Thursday show, which will be 2 days from now, the 26th. And then November the 1st will be the Arduino show with Chris. And then the 14th will be fine scale. And the 15th will be into the locomotive shop. Just because of the way the months work out, those I know are one day apart. They're back to back, but that's just how the calendar works. And then we got the live show on the 18th and Ralph's Weathering on the 28th. So we shall see you Thursday night for the Johnny's Mall Train Talk Show. Y'all have a good evening, and we'll see you Thursday night. Bye.